This video will share one planner's strategy for explaining the planning process when working with customers. I'm Wallace Jennings. I'm a soil conservationist in Oregon. I started my career with NRCS in 2002 in my homeland of American Samoa. One communication strategy that I have found useful when working with my customers is what I call connecting the dots. Connecting the dots is a way to explain the planning process. Throughout the planning process, there are many pieces of information to consider, and one part of our role is to help customers see the connections between the various pieces of information. Each black dot on the screen represents a piece of information in the planning process. The strategy of connecting the dots is like connecting the dots in a picture. The lines between the dots help reveal the picture. Connecting the dots of information with customers helps them more easily see the connections between all the information we'll be talking about during the planning process. For this strategy to be most useful, the dots need to be specifically defined. The dots on the screen are changing color to represent that each dot is a specific piece of information that is relevant to developing conservation alternatives. Let's look at connecting the dots of the 9 steps of conservation planning using this diagram of the steps. Each small circle in the diagram corresponds to one step in the process. To connect the dots, I think of each of the 9 steps of conservation planning as a dot. The dots then become a framework, just like in a connect the dots picture. I can use that framework of dots with customers as we talk about and move through the planning process. Let's look at the first 4 steps of the planning process in phase 1. To connect the dots in this phase, I can explain to the customer how the first steps in the process will be to gather information about their land and their objectives. Each of the 4 steps in that phase is represented by a dot. As we work through the first phase, I can add important pieces of information or data as dots and show where they fit in the process. I want the customer to know how the dots of the first 4 steps connect, and then how all of that information connects to the next phase of thinking about and deciding on alternatives for treatment. Connecting the dots helps me show how these parts of the conservation planning process are connected to each other and how those connections are related to the end goal of implementing a conservation plan that supports their objectives. As new pieces of information come up while we are conducting or talking about different parts of the process, I can come back to this framework of dots to show where new pieces of information connect to the bigger picture. Or we may need to revisit the customer's objectives or part of the data. Using the concept of connecting the dots, I can help customers keep track of where we are in the process. Connecting the dots is a useful framework because the 9-step process provides a consistent reference point for what we are doing. It makes the 9-step planning process easy to understand, and the 9 steps gives us a common methodology we can refer back to. Making that methodology transparent can help us avoid the disconnect or gaps in understanding that can come up when we don't have a common reference point for solving problems or making decisions about implementing conservation. Having that common reference point can be a way to ground our conversation and decision-making in the midst of the different perspectives we bring to the process. We know that people come to the conservation planning process with different preferences, behaviors, and past experiences. That includes me. Both the customer and I have different backgrounds, personal perceptions, individual biases, and other invisible variables that drive our thinking and behavior. These invisible variables can create misunderstandings along the way. Using connecting the dots as a framework for talking with customers can help me see where we are seeing and understanding things differently. We may discover that we don't see the same dots, meaning we may not see the same steps needed in the process. We may realize that we see the same dots, but we don't see them in the same way. The dots on the screen are changing color to represent that we may have different understanding of pieces of information in the planning process. And so we end up with different ideas about what to do or how to do it. And we may discover that we are not connecting the dots in the same way, resulting in different impressions that lead to different ideas about what decisions to make and actions to take. With connecting the dots as a framework, we can see where our understanding diverge. I can see what others miss, and they see what I miss. Then as we work through different ideas and try thinking out of the box, connecting the dots of the 9 steps of conservation planning provides a reference point for making decisions that are grounded in and connected to the information we have discovered in the planning process. I feel that connecting the dots helps me focus my communication. It emphasizes that my work relies on a process. I have to trust the process and have an awareness of and appreciation for the role of each planning step. Trusting the process, using it as my reference point for communication, influences the way I approach problem solving, present opportunities, deliver bad news, and assist customers in implementing conservation on the landscape. Connecting the dots is useful at all stages of the planning process. It helps show the relationships between data you have gathered. It helps show how these patterns and relationships inform possible approaches. Connecting the dots helps me recognize and keep the end goal in mind when gathering ideas and coming up with conservation practices that solve problems and create new possibilities. And it helps me and my customers find a way to the end goal in collaboration.